Okay, welcome everyone to Black and Briefed, our history on the ballot. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about policy. We've been talking a lot about legal cases and how that has affected us in the past and how they'll affect us in the future. But today, we're actually going to talk about someone who has the ability to shape policy for us in the future. This is our very first candidate interview with Miss Courtney McClain. Courtney is a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives for South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. She is the youngest congressional candidate in South Carolina's history. And she's a member of Gen Z. So she will be the first Gen Z Black woman to run in this district, literally making history. She is a graduate of the University of South Carolina and Howard University. There's some HBCU rivalry here because I'm a FAMU Rattler, but it's okay. We still got love. Where she focused on American government and Black politics. She also spent years organizing, mobilizing, and advocating on a range of issues, including voting rights, HBCU funding, and criminal justice reform. So, our conversation today is going to be largely based on her policy priorities, leadership, and issues that are affecting everyday families, not just in South Carolina, but really in the United States in general. Now, this is just an educational discussion in nature. It's not an endorsement of any candidate. It's just an informational session where the goal is to inform you and keep you civically engaged. So, Courtney, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm excited too. So you are going to be a lot of firsts should you be elected to public office. You will be the youngest congressional candidate in South Carolina history. You'll be the first Gen Z Black woman, which is awesome, to run in this district. And
Mhm.
it's crazy because it's 2026. What made you decide that this was the moment that you wanted to step forward on such a national platform?
Well, my journey started when I was 19, and really it's been a culmination of all of those experiences that I've had since undergrad up until this point. But I would say some of the biggest moments for me when I knew that I wanted to run for office. I think the first one was when I decided to speak out for the first time. That was in my hometown of Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it was in relation to the now former sheriff that we had during that time and some really offensive remarks that he made regarding the Black community. And at that time, I'd never written a petition, I'd never spoken to elected officials, and I definitely never given a speech in front of a large crowd of people. And on that day, I really knew that it was important to be that voice for so many people who were very discontent with what was going on. And so 19-year-old me took it upon myself to write a petition on change.org, get some signatures from the community members, and then present that petition to the county council asking for a formal apology from the sheriff and for him to be held accountable. And during that speech, the sheriff gets up in the middle of me talking and walks out of the room. And in that moment, I knew that the power of not only getting a coalition built with the community, but also speaking to your elected officials, no matter how old you are or what your skin color is, it held an impact and a large enough impact to where he had to leave the room. And
Mm.
really, since that moment, I've been able to, of course, do tons of different internships and different fellowships. And of course, while those gave me very important tools, I would say that the experiences that I got, especially at my undergraduate institution, USC, that really shaped the way that I looked at policy and the way that I looked at how I can influence that. Because while I was on campus, I was in student government. So I was able to write legislation for students. I was able to speak directly to students. And also being one of the key activists on campus, while I was there, I probably can't even give you a number of how many protests I held on campus for various issues. And it was always with different demographics. It was sometimes with African American students, sometimes it was with our Latino students, other times it may be with our Arab students. But everything that was singular was that they knew to come to me if they wanted change or for any movement to happen on those issues. And being in that space, having that responsibility, it really fine-tuned my skills of course, student government being able to write policy, but also on the grassroots side, knowing that I can now influence policy and people see me as a leader to do that. And so I started looking into what could I run for because people were saying that, oh, well, you could run for state house when you turn 21, or you could do Congress when you're 25, just all of these different things. And I was able to go to Washington, D.C., where I did an internship with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And I was in the office of Congresswoman Cori Bush, and she was amazing. She really
Mhm.
poured into all of the interns, and she told us that no matter who we are, what we look like, we belong to be in these spaces. And in that moment, seeing her and seeing the operations of Congress, that really solidified that the level of change that I know South Carolina needs, it would be best fit if I was to do that in a congressional seat. And just since then, that has been where I knew that I wanted to run. And at first, I was thinking of 2028, but then just seeing the current state of politics, I said, no, we need to do this now. And so, of course, now I'm currently running for office, and the election is in about 10 or 9 months, if you want to count February now. But it's going really well, and I'm super excited to create change and just further the mission of really challenging power, no matter who it is, what title they hold, because the people should have that voice, and I hope to be that voice.
Awesome. That is a really inspiring story of just meeting the moment.
Mm.
And I think that that is really important now. The fact that you didn't delay and you felt like now is the time, when we see a lot of apathy, but also I think people who are just disillusioned with the entire process, especially young people. Um, Now, was it always your goal to run for public office, or was there some other dream that you had before, but fate just kind of decided to switch things up on you?
Yes, so I've always loved politics. When I first came to USC, so my background is in journalism, and I wanted to be a White House correspondent or to be one of the political anchors, kind of like Rachel Maddow, that type of vibe. So that was what I came into USC wanting to do and what I had my mindset on doing. But of course, as I experienced USC and really seeing all of the different issues that people had on and off campus, because I was also able to intern at the State House, really being able to see all of those issues and how they were all connected, regardless of if it's a college campus, the State House, your local government, federal, all of them are connected because they personally impact you. And it was in those moments where I knew that maybe journalism wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And of course, once I had my internship in DC, it really solidified that, yes, I do want to run for office.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've earned your master's from Howard, right? The Mecca,
Yes.
with a focus on American government and Black politics.
Mhm.
How has studying Black political movements helped to shape the kind of leader that you would like to be?
Yes. So my when I was finishing up my thesis, which gosh, I would never want to go through that process again. But so my focus was actually on South Carolina and Black politics and how we can use our Black electorate in order to change the face of politics here. And so I was really going deep into how South Carolina had the first Black congressman, how we really set the tone for a lot of the policies that we have today because of Robert Smalls. That is why we have public education. South Carolina and our Black elected officials, a lot of times they get forgotten, but they really created the blueprint for politics that we have today. And so doing that research and seeing the importance that our state has, not only within our own borders, but across the United States, that is something that I held very, very important to me. And I knew that seeing everyone who has run before me, the first Black woman ran for Congress in 1971. And now we're in 2026 and we still have not had a Black woman to represent South Carolina. And I know that in this moment, people want to see change. There's disillusionment across not only the Democratic Party, but also within the Republican Party and independents. Everyone just wants to see something different. And I've been able to successfully deliver that. building those inroads with different parties and really seeing people as not just a voter, but as someone who truly just wants to have a better life for themselves and for their children. And I think a lot of politicians have fallen out of that. They really see us as, okay, the voter comes, it's a transaction. I tell you
Mhm.
something great, you vote for me, and then I disappear. But I really want to be someone that is consistent in the community, that is listening, and that is not just treating a voter as a transactional interaction, but as someone who, how am I going to better your life? So I hope that that's something that I can deliver on and something that I can really push during this campaign.
You just touched on this rich history that South Carolina, just by itself as a state, has when it comes to Black politics and Black leaders. And oftentimes that history is erased, forgotten about. And we have a new generation of voters, and specifically a new generation of Black voters coming into the fold. Um, how do we approach specifically getting engaged in the South, where things like gerrymandering and voter suppression are so real? They're active. In your time working and organizing, and also now being a candidate, what would you say to the Black community about the importance of voting, but also the importance of knowing the very rich history that comes from the South?
Yes. Well, of course, we know that if our votes did not have power, they would not be trying to take that away from us. There are so many voters that do not vote in this state, specifically Black voters, that what the current political state that we have in South Carolina, it can be changed. But because of the intentional suppression of our history, because of the intentional use of gerrymandering to really crush our hope that when we cast that ballot is going to create change, that has really created a whole generation of people who did not vote. And then they don't teach their children the importance of voting as well. And so that is something that becomes a cultural issue. And being in spaces where people who don't vote go to, that is something that I have been trying to do for so long. When I was an undergrad, I actually began the organization of Spartanburg Ambassadors for Change. And we went to various spaces where just everyday people go, and we were able to register them to vote. And there was so many people in South Carolina. Once you are not on parole, probation, and you've paid off any fees, you can re-register to vote. But of course, they are not putting that out for a lot of people to see. So we ran into a good number of especially Black men who were saying, "Oh, I just got out of jail. I can't vote anymore." And so we would ask them the questions: Are you on parole? Are you on probation? Do you have any fees? And I was like, "Oh no, I'm just out of jail." And it's like, "Well, you can re-register." And they were like, "Really?" So it's just being in those spaces, educating them on that they can vote, but we also have to give them a reason to vote. Because so many times we hear, we have to vote, we have to vote, we have to vote, but we never say why. Or if we have a candidate, that candidate is never someone where people are like, yeah, I'm just ready to go vote for them, because they're focusing on things that the average person, whether it's in their district or their area, is not focused on. And so I think for me, and something that I've seen successful with registering people to vote, getting into those areas, at USC, we actually collaborated with the NAACP, and then we also had Black Voters Matter come, and we actually registered about 150 students within that 3-hour period, just by having me standing there, having some merch, telling them, hey, like, this is really important to do. We have some elections coming up. During that time, we had our first Black woman running for governor, Mia McLeod. And so it gave them a reason as to why they should vote, what change can come from that. And so in this campaign, that's something that I've really been focusing on, is the why, not only just do it because it's your duty. So I think just changing the culture on that is going to obviously take much longer. It's going to take the entire length of this campaign to do so. But it is something that can be changed if you really put the intention into having a candidate that can relate to them, and also having that purpose, having that reason that they see, well, when I cast my ballot, I'm voting for this change that I want to see. So that's what I think has really been helpful on that side.
What do you think are the biggest threats to voting access today?
Well, I mean, we have the SAVE Act coming
Mhm.
through, and that is going to threaten millions of people, especially women. There are, I think, the most recent thing that I read was that half of Americans don't even have a passport, and I know that was something that was included in the SAVE Act, and there's so many women who don't have ready access to their birth certificates in order for them to come and get that changed. So that is intentional voter suppression, but we also know that the Republican Party intentionally does these things because for them, lower voter turnout means winning. And we've seen all of these various elections that have been happening across the United States. And we know that any election can be competitive as long as we make it so. And they're trying to make it to where as little people as possible vote in those elections.
Yes, I think that the SAVE Act is something that a lot of people probably don't understand, the real impact that it's going to have. A lot of our parents, some of our grandparents were alive and had to pay poll taxes. So when you talk about having to have a passport, that's money that is
Mhm.
required to get a passport in order to vote. So in essence, it's almost like you're creating poll taxes again. I think it's interesting because in the 2025 version of the SAVE Act, there was all this talk about real ID, real ID, real ID, what that even meant, how long you were going to have to get a real ID. And now in this newest version, real ID isn't enough. Now you need a passport. Like it's always it's always like they're pushing the goalposts further and further and further to make it harder for people to vote, which if you are a citizen, why should it be hard? Why should you have to have all of these things and prove all of these things? There's a lot of misinformation about whether or not non-citizens are able to vote if they are participating in the voting process, and I think we have the opposite problem.
Mhm.
In the 2024 election, you had one third who voted for one candidate, one third who voted for another, and one third that didn't vote at all. So I think we have the opposite problem where we don't have people who are not supposed to be participating. We just don't have enough people who should be participating who could doing so. People need to know what it is that they're voting for outside of
Mhm.
just the candidates. They need to know why their vote matters. As a Gen Z candidate, how do you think young voters should be engaged differently from how they've been engaged in past cycles?
So, something that we are directly doing is going to college campuses. I just left two college campuses this week, and being in those spaces, I was able to directly engage with them. And I think that's something that we often overlook is that a lot of politicians want people to come to them as opposed to going into those spaces. And of course, I just graduated last year and then I just left undergrad going on 3 years ago. So I'm not far from removed from that environment. So being in those spaces is very easy for me to communicate with them. When I recently had an event at Furman and students were literally sitting on the floor, it was so many people there. And of course, we were talking about the importance of Gen Z in American politics. And I was honestly surprised at how many people showed up for that. But it was great to see that so many students are interested to see where we fit in, especially as it relates to politics. But we just have to make sure that we are being in those spaces and that we are communicating with them in a way that they understand. Of course, don't social media, my entire digital team, we're all Gen Z. So we know what it takes to get that viral video out. We know, sometimes maybe when you use like hashtags on Facebook, because they have a different algorithm going on over there.
Yes.
But getting all of that out, like, so many people when I went to the college yesterday, they said, "I saw you on TikTok. I've been seeing your videos." And that is perfect because you're a target audience. You're who we're trying to get to see these videos and interact with politics. So I would say the way is to make sure that you're going onto those campuses, of course, with permission, working with student orgs, and then also making your social media engaging and not just like boring. Because I think oftentimes with politics, social media can be boring. So something that we intentionally try to do is make it fun. We try to add different aspects to it, like drop whatever opinion you have in the comments, share it with your friends, like making it something where people feel like they're being a part of a movement as opposed to sitting there and watching a lecture on their phone.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I feel like you need to meet the people where they are and not, like you said, wait for them to come to you.
Mhm.
I think that so much of what politics has been is has been a sense of elitism, right? Where like I'm the elected official, you come to me if you have concerns, but 9 times out of 10 we don't even know how to access
Yeah.
our elected officials, and are they even available to us? So being able to reach people where they are is truly important, and I think it is changing the landscape of elections and politics as we know it. Now, I want to touch on something that the American people have said it was a major issue and reason why they voted the way they voted in 2024: the cost of living and
Mhm.
economics.
Yes.
Now, we know that should you be elected to office, you will represent all of South
Mhm.
Carolina, not just a particular community.
Mhm.
But on Black and Briefed, we are talking specifically with and engaging with the Black community to ensure that they understand what candidates are out there and what those candidates plan to do for our community. So
Mhm.
these questions will be asked through that lens. Many Black families feel squeezed. Many Black families are living paycheck to paycheck.
Mhm.
And with the issues up on Capitol Hill, and the partisan politics, you have government assistance and welfare programs that are also hanging in the balance politically. They feel squeezed by rising housing costs,
Mhm.
food prices are going up, insurance premiums are increasing.
Mhm.
What federal policies do you believe would make the most immediate impact for those families and specifically the families of South Carolina?
Yes. So our entire core platform is under the umbrella of affordability. We want to make sure that you have quality homes that you can afford. And I put quality because specifically within our district, we do have affordable housing. But then when we look at the quality of said housing, it's just a roof over your head. You don't have AC that is working. You don't have the utilities that you need. So we made sure to put in quality housing that you can afford. Also making sure that you have health care without hardship because you should, just because you need to pay for your insulin doesn't mean that you also shouldn't be able to buy your children clothing or get any other necessities that you may need. And then the third one is education without barriers, because we actually have around a dozen colleges within this district alone. There are so many college students that are here who do want to make Spartanburg or Greenville their home, but because of that cost, because of the burden of all of these different loans and interest on tops of those loans, they're having to move elsewhere or they're having to take out even more loans, putting themselves in more debt. And then I know with my generation, we want to put down roots, but now it is harder to buy a home. Rent
Mhm.
is increasing to the prices of a mortgage rate every month. And so it's really unsustainable for our community and for young people to live even within South Carolina. And, South Carolina, people come here because we have the low property taxes, we have the low rates, but even for those of us here, we're saying this is becoming a lot. And so, one of the things that I really want to introduce is to introduce a national tenants' rights bill of rights. So that would cap rent hikes, that would make sure that there are banning no cause evictions, because South Carolina, unfortunately, we continue to see an increase in evictions and foreclosures, and it continues to rise every single year. So that's something that we really need to work on and hone in on, because I know South Carolina is not the only state that is being faced with rising evictions and rising foreclosures. We also have a great influx of corporations that are coming in, buying up all of the land, and then putting in subdivisions that are not affordable for those in the area. And when they come through and do those property appraisals, yes, okay, your property value is going up, but that also means the taxes are going up. And so you're pricing locals out of their homes that they've been able to live in for who knows how long. So, really making sure that we are also putting restrictions or completely banning some corporations from buying up all of these homes, and so that we can support families, support our veterans, support our disabled community, support all of our vulnerable communities within South Carolina, and within specifically District 4, that is something that I'm really focused on as well. Another thing that was brought up to me that I find very interesting is, of course, the cost of groceries. Now, we know that that is directly tied to the tariffs that are currently going on. And depending on how the Supreme Court rules on that, we may or may not continue to have those in place. But from a legislation standpoint, something that I really wanted to implement was the banning of dynamic pricing. So that is
Mm,
something that Walmart and some other larger chains have put in place. When you walk in, your price for a good should not be different from another person's price. Or just because you came in the morning does not mean that that price should be different from someone who goes in the evening. Completely banning the use of dynamic pricing because it's really just legal price gouging. We need to make sure that that is not occurring within groceries, within rent. And honestly, I know a lot of people see that with transportation when it comes to Lyft and Uber. That is something that people need transportation. They need groceries. They need to pay their rent. That should be something that is on a standing, non movable scale as opposed to, oh, well, we see more people coming in at this time of the day. Let's boost it up at this time. Completely banning that is another thing that I want to do to bring down the cost of living. And on the front of education, because we know education, you and I especially, we know the importance of education and having access to that. Of course, Biden tried to stop all of the loan repayments, and that kind of fell through. But something that we can do is pass restrictions on all of these private loan places and the interest rates that they can place on these loans. So, really passing legislation to make sure that we are not being price gouged for simply wanting to have a better education. That is something that I also want to introduce and something that will also help education become more affordable. It will help housing become more affordable. And once we get to the segment of healthcare, we I think everyone finally understands the importance of healthcare. After the 40-day and 40-night shutdown, everyone finally understands the importance of having quality healthcare that is affordable and accessible to everyone. Healthcare should not be a luxury, it should be a right. You have a right to be healthy, you have a right to be seen by a doctor if you are not feeling your best. But with the current system that we have, all of these different middlemen that are taking in all of these different insurance rates. And we've also seen these premiums rise because they have not given any of the subsidies back to the ACA. That is going to harm around 90,000 people that are in my district. Those are not only just voters, those are people who probably won't be able to have healthcare altogether. They may completely drop off of the ACA. So, really, when I get into Congress, hopefully, fingers crossed, that is something that I really want to push is making sure that we have a system that takes out that middleman. I've said before that I do support Medicare for all, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to get quality, safe, affordable health care. And really, with that legislation, it really solves all of the problems that we currently have. And I also want to make sure that we cap all of our out of pocket costs. Something that I really like that the previous administration did was the cap on insulin prices. We've now seen that that has been overturned, and now he's
mhm.
trying to roll that back some because of the pushback. But we really want to make sure that we pass that into not just an executive order, but pass that within a law. So where it is not when if we have another president who wants to help corporations over people, it'll be a little harder for them to do that next time. So I would say those would be the main things on education, housing, healthcare around affordability that I would focus on. Probably like my first 90 days.
So, another big part of affordability and just overall economic stability is small businesses. In
Mhm.
the South, small businesses thrive, honestly. How many mom and pops do we have in the South? Businesses that have been in families for generations, farm towns, and farmland that have been in families for generations as well, especially considering that agriculture is such a major part of the South.
Mhm.
Black entrepreneurship is growing, but access to capital remains uneven and not evenly distributed. What would you do to expand federal support for small and minority owned businesses?
So, of course, Spartanburg and Greenville, they are growing, and we have countless small businesses. And something that a lot of business owners that I have heard from is they feel that corporations and larger businesses have been placed before them. And so that is something that I want to change, of course, hopefully when I get to Congress. And some of the ideas that I have for that would be to create those targeted programs and funding specifically for, of course, entrepreneurs of colors, women owned, veteran owned, disabled owned, really minority owned businesses. And so that way that can help them with getting networking help, mentorship help, having increased access to capital as well. And just really leveling the playing field for all of our small businesses so that we're not behind and allowing all these corporations to come in and take all of the funding and take all of the benefits that would really help our local businesses and local residents that have been supporting this district for so long. Another thing that I also wanted to do was to also allow for tax credits for small businesses as well. And so that would tie into predictable scheduling. And that is something that will not only help the owner, but also would help their workers as well. And that way, so many people, I think a good example is the largest kind of issue going on in Spartanburg is that we have a mega data center that is planning to come.
Mm.
And something that they have done is they have lowered the tax rates for that said data center from 10% to 4%. We don't need to cut tax rates for multi-million dollar, sometimes billion-dollar companies. That should be given to our small businesses who are truly in need of those. So that's something that I would really want to implement is making sure that we are not giving tax breaks to billionaires, but that we are giving these tax credits to those who truly need them and who really support our communities and support this district as a whole. So I would say those would be some of the main things that I would like to implement around small businesses. I think something else that is also important is making sure that we are protecting our small businesses from the volatility of our current administration. Some days we have tariffs, some days they take the tariffs away, sometimes they increase it on certain items. I want to make sure that our small businesses are really shielded from that. So that's something that I wanted to also introduce and, of course, flesh that out more as to how we can do that. But I do know that that is a current problem that we have, especially with our small businesses who don't have the capital, who don't have the support as larger corporations do in order to protect themselves from those shocks.
So I want to go back to the topic of healthcare, but I want to touch on Black maternal mortality, which we know Black women are up to 5 times more likely to die in childbirth
Mm,
than their white counterparts and other women of color.
yes.
Um, this remains disproportionately high. What role do you think the federal government has in addressing this crisis, especially when there is an ongoing debate between the extent of federal government's power and what is considered state rights? What do you think the federal government's role should be in protecting, the least of us when it comes to healthcare and health access?
Yes, and I know specifically on the topic of maternal mortality, South Carolina has consistently ranked in the top 10 of maternal mortality deaths. And recent research has shown that almost 90% of those would have been preventable just by having access to quality healthcare. And that is something that I think on the state level, a lot of our legislators are so adamant about banning abortion, banning a woman's right to choose, but they're not looking at all of the negatives that are coming from the legislation that they're trying to push through. And so, something that I really want to make sure that even if it's not even passed, but something that I want to introduce is especially in relation to women's reproductive health. I want to make sure that we are extending our coverage to reproductive health care. So when you have insurance and also include dental and vision as well. But oftentimes our insurance is not comprehensive. Why are we reproductive health, vision, and dental? All of these things include a complete, comprehensive, good bill of health. Why is that not currently being covered by insurance? Or you have to get a separate insurance for those things. That should be something that should be an all inclusive package. If you do decide to get whichever insurance that you have, that should be the standard. And so that's something that, of course, I've seen they've been trying to pass that in Congress unsuccessfully, but hopefully, if we have a Democratic majority, that could be something that we could pass in the upcoming session. Something that I also want to make sure that we work on is fighting to increase access to affordable contraceptives. South Carolina has countless contraceptive deserts. So many times, like I said before, our state legislators continue to talk about banning abortion, but they never talk about why people are having to get abortions. That is because of the lack of affordable contraceptives. That is because of other dangerous things that may have happened in their lives to where they felt like they had to make that hard decision to get an abortion. But something that we know that helps is by increasing access to affordable contraceptives. And South Carolina, many of our legislators do not understand that. But on a national level, if we are able to create a program that allows increased access to contraceptives and also make sure that education on that is also readily available, that is something that could really help with giving women more independence as to what they want to choose to do with their bodies because it is our choice. And it also allows for a more comprehensive healthcare coverage when it comes to people who are looking for those things. I think outside of reproductive health, something that I've really wanted to also speak on is with the Big Beautiful Bill, which is that name. Something that has impacted South Carolina is that we actually have about 5 rural hospitals because of that bill that are under risk of closure. So in Congress, I really want to pass legislation that gives the proper funding to those hospitals, as well as, of course, other hospitals across the nation that are also being negatively impacted by that. Because especially in South Carolina, our rural residents, they're the ones that are also the most impacted by healthcare gaps. And so making sure that they have access to hospitals, I think that should be the most basic thing that people are pushing for. And it's been very surprising to see that I've really been the only candidate in this race so far that's really pushed to make sure that those hospitals have proper funding and ensure that rural residents have access to be able to go to a hospital to get care. And so I think that's something that I really find important, not only to this district, but across South Carolina as well, and across the US for other rural residents, and something that I would really want to push on that front.
One of the things I noticed when I looked at your platform is that you have a platform point of common sense humanity. And I
Yeah.
thought that was very clever, but also very simple.
Mhm,
And I think that it's a simple concept that we are losing.
mhm,
You see it every day. Common sense humanity. We're losing connection to each other. We
mhm,
are losing the sense that we are a community, that we don't live in silos, that when we vote, we're not just voting for our own interests, we are voting either to the detriment of or for the benefit of other communities as well. With that, I want to touch on what common sense humanity means to you and your campaign.
I think common sense humanity means serving the least of us. There's so many politicians that we currently have that take our vulnerable communities as punching bags because they know that they don't have the voice or the power to really push back. But I really think that a politician or an elected official, the power that we have the power to uplift everyone. And so, if elected to Congress, that's something that I will do, regardless of if you are Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you align with. All of us have a common thread of humanity that we have as a right. And so I think when it comes to common sense humanity, some of the things that I touch on is, of course, really curtailing the homelessness crisis. That is something that we are seeing at an increased rate across the district and across the United States as well. Of course, that ties into the previous point that I was talking about with the increased number of evictions and foreclosures of people being kicked out of their home. And then, of course, those evictions go on your record. And even if you do get the money, it's still harder to get housing that you need. And so people really fall into the not really like a system of homelessness, but they fall into the problem of being consistently homeless. And so that's something that I really wanted to really touch on with Common Sense Humanity, is that a lot of people have placed homeless Americans in a basket of, oh, well, they're lazy, they do drugs, they don't want to work. But so many people don't realize that they are also only 1 to 2 paychecks away from being in the same predicament as so many of our homeless colleagues. And that's something that I really wanted to put and make sure that people understood. So really passing legislation that will guarantee low income housing, and that will also compare that with wraparound services. So that will help with getting jobs, that will help with healthcare, that'll help with addiction care if they may need that, and really helping our community members to be better and not to just have temporary housing and then we kind of throw them out on back onto the street if they don't have a home or a job in whichever time period they've been given. We need to make sure that we are also giving housing and then giving those services that they need. And of course, another thing that has been very popular, really for all of the wrong reasons right now, is the use of ICE and how that is being used to target also our vulnerable communities. Over 70% of those who have been arrested or detained by ICE have no criminal record. But they have been this administration has been very successful in pushing the propaganda that they're only arresting criminals or only arresting rapists and the worst of the worst. But when we look at the numbers, we see that they are actually arresting children. They're arresting people who go to work every day to just try to get a living. They're arresting people who are keeping our cities and they're keeping our streets clean. They're keeping all of our really everything that we need to succeed and have as necessities, they're in the background of that. And so I really wanted to make sure that we are getting rid of detention and deportation as a default, that we are eliminating funding to this agency, and that we are also dismantling that agency as well to ensure that we can create a separate agency, because of course we do need some type of protection on the border, but the current one that we have right now has proven that it has been militarized. It has been used against the people for this administration's personal benefit. And that is something that we need to end immediately and replace that with something that is definitely far more holistic, something that is going to, of course, get those who do commit crimes off of our streets and out of the country, but in a way that is not going to kill Americans, rip families apart, and really degrade so many people in the process. So that's something that I definitely have within the supporting common sense section. I'm trying to think what else do I, oh, and of course with Gaza as well. That is something that I've been in support of since November of 2023, before it was the popular thing to do. I've really been able to understand the humanity of Palestinians, even though they are thousands of miles away. And I know with the current situation with ICE that Palestine has kind of fallen into the background, but that issue is still ongoing. We need to make sure that we are supporting an arms embargo to Israel, that we are holding Netanyahu accountable. And I know with the current mayor Mandami of New York, he said, if he comes to New York, he will help the ICC with his arrest warrant. I think that that should be a national statement as opposed to just coming to one singular city. But that is something that I really wanted to make sure that we do on that front, especially as it relates to foreign affairs, because as we see, they just kidnapped a dictator from Venezuela, but they also have Netanyahu that is committing a genocide. So it's really a double standard of who we hold accountable, and everyone should be held accountable for all of these different problems that we have been currently having.
The other very controversial topic that a lot of young people want to know is about corporate lobbying and corporate money in
Mhm.
elections and in government. With that, where do you stand on candidates accepting corporate dollars and PAC money? And where do you stand as far as your campaign on whether or not you have or will take any corporate PAC money?
Well, I think I'll start off by saying that I am not taking any corporate PAC money at all. And I do support overturning Citizens United because I think the reason why we have so many candidates who are beholden to corporations over the interests of their constituents is because they're able to give unlimited amounts of money. And so they listen to the person that is waving the dollar sign in their bill in their face over the person who really needs that help that casted the ballot for them. And so I definitely support overturning Citizens United. I've made the personal decision to not take any corporate PAC money, and I will never take any corporate PAC money. This has been a 100% grassroots campaign. Of course, we have some PACs that are going to be helping, but they're union PACs or PACs that help with specifically Black candidates, but no corporate PACs whatsoever. And I think that a lot of the problems that we see today stem from being able to have an unlimited amount of money in our elections.
One of the things I thought about when we were talking about healthcare is that it is very hard for the federal government to create certain mandates or guardrails for state citizens
Mhm.
when that state denies certain things, such as not expanding Medicaid,
Mhm.
right? It creates an issue that you can only do so much. And what I think a lot of the general public has a tendency to do is not understand where the power lies.
Mhm.
So they'll get angry at the federal government when
Mhm.
really we need to look a little deeper at state and local government.
Mhm.
So, with that being said, if elected, how would you balance your party alignment with the district interests, the interests of your constituents?
Well, I think something that, especially within Generation Z, that we often do is we do not solely align ourselves with one specific thing purely because of who's leading it. Yes, I am running as a Democrat, but that is not where my 100% allegiance is just always going to be. If my constituents want something and they know that that is going to help them, I have no problem with representing them in that aspect. And I think one of the biggest things on that is we currently have the data centers that are trying to come to Spartanburg. And that is something that is a bipartisan issue. I've been able to make inroads with both Democrats and Republicans, being the only candidate that is coming out, standing with them, speaking against these issues. And that is something that I want to continue to do in Congress is that, yes, I am running as a Democrat, but I am here to represent everyone, even if all of the people who vote for my opponent, I am still going to be representing you. And that is something that has been absent from this district for far too long.
Now, on the federal level, you would be the main check on the executive branch's power, or at least that is the way that it's supposed to work. So, if elected, how would you approach oversight of the current administration where you disagree with the direction that the administration is going?
Well, I think the biggest thing is holding them accountable for the Epstein files. That has been something that a lot of people have been focusing on, but they've been using it to create really like sensationalism as opposed to actually holding them accountable. And so I know, and as well as other Gen Z candidates, there's actually a movement for different people to sign on to say, when I get there, I'm going to hold you accountable for that aspect. We know that that's something that this administration is unpopular for on both sides, and really holding his feet to the fire as to we have all of these names, but why is no one being arrested? Why is no one being held accountable for it? That is something that I will definitely sign on to and I will definitely do. And as it relates to, of course, the validity of the tariffs, the validity of all of the war powers that he has taken away from Congress. That is also something that I want to make sure that I bring back to us by signing on to a war powers resolution to curtail what this administration is currently doing. I also want to make sure that we are taking back Congress's power of the purse and really making sure that we are using our power and not just giving it away, because that is, of course, the current party in power. That's their leadership, and they've allowed him to just continue to take that away. We need to make sure that we put in the checks and balances that our founders put in place for us, and to not allow for someone to act in an authoritarian manner.
What would you say to voters who feel disillusioned, or they feel unheard, or they feel like, why even do this? How does my vote matter? What would you tell them, especially as you will be a candidate for election in this midterm?
I think, I mean, I know this week I even felt that way. There were so many people, hundreds of people came out in opposition to the current data center that they're trying to bring in, and the county council still voted to pass that through. Seeing hundreds of people there speaking in opposition, being passionate about how that is going to impact them, and they still voted against the interests of their people. So even in that moment, I felt that disappointment. I saw representatives not representing the people who they're supposed to be. And so I think, to those people, because I understand how you feel, we cannot give up our fight. We have to continue to stand up, because now that vote, they were supposed to vote on it on Monday, but now they've pushed it to another month because so many people spoke out. We need to continue to use our power. We need to continue to hold our elected officials accountable, and we need to organize and make sure that when we do show up, the same way that we showed up organized, knowing who was going to speak, knowing what we wanted everyone to say, we need to make sure for the next meeting on the final vote for that we do that same exact thing. And on this campaign, I also know that I'm going to be someone who represents everyone. I come from a space of activism. I don't come from a political background. So I know the importance of having a diverse coalition. When you even look as far back as to the Black Panther Party, it wasn't just with Black Americans. They also ended up collaborating with Latino Americans. They collaborated with poor white rural Americans. We know that our power resides in our coalition, and building that coalition, regardless of what your party may be, because that is what they use to divide us. We can create that change and stand in our power. And I hope to be the candidate that empowers all of those communities to stand up in November and say, I may have been voting a specific way, or I've never voted for a candidate like this before, but I know the change that I want to see. So I'm going to cast my ballot for her.
What does the 4th Congressional District of South Carolina look like in 5 years' time under Courtney McClain's leadership?
5 years. Ooh. Well, I hope we have fair opportunities for our small businesses. I hope that we have equal access to healthcare for everyone. I hope that our colleges are flourishing and that we have more graduates who decide to stay in the district, build their careers here, build their families here. And I hope that we have better transportation, which is something I didn't really touch on in this interview, but I hope we have access to buses that run faster than an hour and every 30 minutes. I hope that we have access for our veterans so they're not homeless on the sides of the roads, but they actually are given the promise of the life that they are owed by giving service to our country. I hope that we have a district that is truly representative of those who live here and not of the corporations who want to make money off of it.
Right. Well, South Carolina, you heard it. This is Miss Courtney McClain. She is running to represent the 4th Congressional District. Courtney, please let the audience know all of the important dates, when they need to be registered to vote. Register to vote, and check your registration more than once,
Yes.
because they're
Told you.
doing some funny stuff down
Yeah.
here in the South. But give the audience the important dates to look out for and when election day is.
Yes. So election day is going to be on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2026. I'm currently the only Dem in the race. So we do have a primary date of June the 9th. But if I continue to be the only candidate, that we won't have that date anymore. So it just goes straight to the general. You can find more information as to where to volunteer. We have so many events coming up for you all to volunteer. That can be found on McClain4SC.com, and that is FORSC.com. And also, all of our social medias are McClain4SC as well. We have all of our updates there, our different videos showing me in the community, different ways that you can also interact and engage and add your opinion to the conversation, because this is not just a campaign, it is a movement that includes everyone. So making sure that you are included in that way. Of course, we are also in our fundraising. So if you would like to also give, that can be found on our website as well at McClain4SC.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney, for spending your time with us, for having this conversation. It was well needed, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.